Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this CEO Talk session. So we will have an interesting session. Since yesterday we were talking about how to move from 300 to 3,000, how to create more African champions. That means that we must see how we can help companies to grow from where they are to more than 1 billion turnover. It's quite complicated. It's not a simple issue, but some of our honorable guests have done it. So they will certainly give us the key challenges and what are the key success factors that allow to move from that point to the other. So for this session, we have brilliant CEOs who are here and who will share their experience. I'll call first Mrs. Rita Maria Zneiber, chairman of Diana Holding, which is an important Moroccan native group, but now quite international. Madame Zneiber, là où vous êtes le plus à l'aise. And then I will call Mr. Kousseini Dlamini, who is the chairman of Massmart, which is also an important group in distribution, native from South Africa, but also global now. And also Mr. Mustafa Rauji, who is the CEO of Robank, but we will see that Robank is just a part of the business, but it's more global and he's touching many activities. They all are, at this stage, African champions. So it's very interesting to hear from them, these African champions that have grown and made it. Still they have to do, but at least we consider them as champions. So my first question will go to Mr. Kousseini. Mr. Kousseini, you are a big player in distribution in South Africa, in all the Southern African region. So what we call an African champion, one of the most important groups in South Africa. How today we can make challenges to create more growth for companies, to help them become champion and also reach this $1 billion target.
Cette cible d'1 milliard de dollars.
For the opportunity. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Perhaps just take a mic. Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I would say the first thing really, we need to be patient and also play the long game. I mean, most businesses that we know of today that are successful, they did not become successful overnight. They had single-minded entrepreneurs that were hungry for success. The business that I'm chairman of today, called Massmart, was founded by a South African entrepreneur called Mark Lambetti. He bought 6 stores in the late 80s. And out of that, he built the largest general merchandise retailer in Africa, the largest DIY and home improvement retailer on the continent, and the second largest distributor of consumer goods in general across the continent. How did he do it?
I'll just stop here before you say how did he do it. So you are saying that Massmart, which is an African champion, Massmart's story began in the late 80s by 6 stores.
Correct.
And now it's how much turnover?
We've got over $5 billion US turnover.
So from 80 to today, from 6 stores to more than $8 billion turnover. That's great. I think it's
More than 5 billion.
more than 5 billion. It deserves applause. And then we'll
We'll
see how it happens, because everybody is very interesting to see how did you make it.
So the way it was done, as I was saying, we had this very visionary leader who was single-mindedly focused in building a business of scale. And what he did from the start was to benchmark what he was doing against the best in the world. At the time and up to today, the best in the world was Walmart. So every year, he used to go to Bentonville, visit Walmart, just to learn, take the top leadership team there, learning from the best, play the long game, and embed international best practice. Even if you operate in Africa, I think consumers are the same all over the world. They all want quality. They all want affordable products. And our mission as a business, our purpose is to help our customers save money so that they can live better. If they can save when they shop with us, they will have more money to invest for their children, more money for holidays, more money to have better homes. So that is why all our colleagues, over the 40,000 employees that we have, when they wake up every day, they know their mission is to help our customers save money so that they can live better. And increasingly, we know that our customers are time poor. We also have to save them time. So the issue of convenience comes in, which is why now we are investing proactively and aggressively in e-commerce, so that our customers, in the comfort of their homes, can just click and buy and they get the goods delivered to their doorstep. So it's really all about also being innovative, moving with the times, and not being afraid of disrupting yourself. Because what makes us successful today, probably in the next 2 to 3 years, may not be that relevant. Aspects may be, but other aspects may not be. So we must constantly innovate, must constantly be creative, and inculcate a culture of entrepreneurship among our staff. And that is what we need to inculcate across Africa, so that we build not just African champions, but we must build global champions. We must seek to make sure that we've got African-owned and run companies in the Fortune 100, in the FTSE 100 in London, that are global beaters. A country like South Korea, similar size as most African countries, was almost at the same level of development in the 50s as most African countries. But today, you struggle to find a home without a product from South Korea, whether it's Samsung or LG or their motor vehicles, their automobiles. How have they done it? They've done it by being innovative, investing in research and development, and not being scared of thinking big. Some of our countries are small on their own, which is why the African Continental Free Trade Area is really a good step in the right direction. Because no African country on its own, whether it's South Africa or Nigeria, can really be able to succeed in the global economy unless we pool our resources, our capabilities, and our expertise together.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kuseni. I think that's a very good entry point, and I have many questions raising. I will come back on the story, but right, I think you have given some key factors. First, the vision. Second, trying to have the best quality. You're saying that the standard was Walmart, so to see how to reach learning from the best, and also trying to give to your customers the high standards, making your employees feel good. That's quite interesting things to learn about it, but still, I think there are, perhaps you have faced some challenges, but we'll come on that after to see what challenges did you face and how you made it. But it's very interesting, and the point you have given that South Korea made it, but in 75, I know that I saw a newspaper of that period saying that we have a South Korean delegation coming to Côte d'Ivoire just to learn from the miracle Ivoirien. At that period, for them in 75, Côte d'Ivoire was a miracle, because this African, what we called before the African Switzerland was a miracle, and they learned from Côte d'Ivoire, and today we know where South Korea is, so that means that we can make it. Je vais me retourner vers Monsieur Raoji.
So I'm now going to turn to Mr. Raoji. So
Following what Mr. Kuseni has said, if you can add some key success factors just to share, and then we will turn to Madame Zneiber to go in some specific areas that are strategic for Africa.
Yeah, I think it's really to echo on a lot of what you said. It's sort of this idea of when you're trying to build your business. Depending on the environment that you're in, you then pick strategies to try to grow your business. I think the truth is that there is no right speed or there's no right pace. The only right pace is the one that you're comfortable with. So if you want to run a marathon, you can run the marathon and finish in 1 hour, 30 minutes, but you can finish in 8 hours also, or 9 hours. The idea is that you should not run out of breath, and you need to get to your finish line. So I think it's each sort of visionary leader, businessman, etc., has to understand what his real pace is and maintain that pace and know his purpose. So if the purpose of what you're doing is very clear to you, then the purpose becomes very clear to your teams, and then you can rally around that to sort of create this vision to grow your business across the board. But our story is a little bit different. It's a four-generation multi-family business. So it started in 1935, and we probably have 1/5 the revenue of Massmart. So we're very slow runners of the marathon. You know, we walk the marathon.
Yes,
if I could say so.
35 is less than 100 years. That's quite
Yeah,
good
that's right.
still.
But so the challenges as we developed in the DRC was the size of the market. So it meant to grow your businesses, you had to go multi-industry and keep learning new industries. So we went from FMCG distribution, sort of figured that out. Then we went into industrial production units, started to learn that, and then we entered banking and finance. We understood that, into insurance, and relearn everything and understand that. Then you go into sort of venture capital and tech, and try to sort of understand that. So it's a very multi-pronged approach to try to get to the same objective in a single market strategy. So that was a little bit of our story. I think the essence of it was a lot of trying to be very long-term. I think if there's a family DNA that's going to carry on through the generations, is really sort of the idea of respect, honesty, in all the dealings that you do, because that carries on for a very, very long time. And I think those simple ingredients put together with a dose of ambition and determination, I think, takes you quite far in life. The simple story.
Great. And in the story, are you country-based, or did you grow more in the region?
Fully DRC based up to now.
Okay.
95% DRC based.
So still in a local strategy, for sure, that DRC is a continent, but at this stage, it's quite big as a continent. But still, that means that your next 10 billion perhaps will grow across the continent. Perhaps. Thank you very much for the story. Merci, je vais me tourner vers vous, Madame Zneba.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to you, Mrs. Nebad, Diana Holding, a beautiful story. And we know that you work quite a lot on the continent with agricultural processing. So how has this group come to life, and how have you become a champion being at the heart of agricultural processing, both on the national, regional, and continental level? Well, thank you very much for giving me the floor. I am very impressed by the progress of these two gentlemen, and what I like to keep in mind is something that you mentioned, the fact that it is important to not necessarily run too fast. Okay, it is not a sprint. At the end of the day, we all have different goals, and I believe we all understand this. Though we are anticipating what there is to be done, we are still being cautious. So, to come back to the story of our group, we started from the earth. And I say this because I'm referring to the founder. It was a group that is at its second generation now. It's a group that's diversified around the 1975s. And it all started in 1957. We started in the first phase. And we started working in the domain of Nzala, which is a family-owned domain, and we were growing different crops around there. And then later on, we diversify with storage of fish, maybe production of chicks, of one-day-old chicks. We produce also feeds for cattle. We also produce extra virgin oil, extra virgin olive oil, and we also we have been a bottler of Coca-Cola for a very long time. And as part of the Coca-Cola policy, they require to have one person to bottle their drinks within a single country. So it's no longer what we are doing, but in our DNA we have partnership, because we establish partnerships that make sense with corporations that are sharing our values, and we find ways to ensure the sustainability of our group, especially since it's a family-owned group. We also work in plastic And recently, the Council for Competition has validated our joint venture with the group Outlaw, which is a group from Austria, and we make films. We make bottle caps, etc. And we are trying to grow this because it goes along with agriculture and agro industry. We are also in distribution. We are quite modest, but we are trying to capitalize on our experience as a distributor from Coca-Cola, which allows us to reach several thousands of sale points. And we have the ability to sort of replicate what has been done. And we, for example, do distribution for Unilever. And obviously, our ambitions to distribute products go beyond all of this. So I would say that it's an enterprise that really is part of the plan that we have, which is, I can't quite find the words, but I would qualify it as being what we want to do in Africa. And ultimately to multiply our turnover by 10. So we are at about $43 million at the moment. I don't think that in order to make that happen, we would be in a situation where we don't know how to share our know-how in agriculture, in processing, with partners that we need to identify within Africa. Thank you. So we're talking about, you talk about the 4 million. So it's 430 million, right? 430, not 43, because you said 43. Oh, that was a mistake of mine. Not 43 turnover. So you see, I don't even pay that much attention to numbers. I'm really focused on other things, honestly. Indeed. So we look at your story and we see how important vision is. We see how important it is to look ahead. We know that as of today, in the tech world, people are in such a rush. They want to reach the $1 billion in a matter of a few months or years. So it's important to highlight patience. And we see that the strength of these groups that you are chairing is this long-term vision, is the ability to diversify also, because when we look at you, we see that at a point or another there was a possibility to diversify, and you decided to head toward things that were complementary. Yeah, go for it. And also put the human being at the heart of our needs. And this has been said already very well by our colleague from South Africa. It's important to take into account this idea of sharing, of paying attention to our people, and it's going to help us go further. This is true. We really are in a management method that focuses on the human component. Now, when we listen to all of these different journeys, we get the feeling that it all started gradually, very easily, very smoothly, but I imagine that there's been quite a lot of difficulties and challenges here and there. So this really is what I would like to talk about now.
This journey, what were the main challenges? Because when we listen to stories, it seems that it went steadily growing and arriving there, and we all know that you didn't made it easily there. Africa is not an easy continent, so there are some challenges. So what are the main challenges you have faced, and how have you dealt with them?
Thank you very much. It's inescapable that there are challenges, and you've got to face them head on. And sometimes you have to take a strategic or tactical retreat while you're trying to advance and expand. I mean, we have had to pull out of certain markets, for example, when we realize it doesn't work and it will never work. And in the retail space. It's really about being bold and decisive. If a store doesn't work, you just have to close it down and look for the best location. Retail is ultimately location, location, location. It's about getting the right margins that will make your business to be sustainable and profitable, to keep the jobs that you have. So I think it is important that you have to be humble enough to learn the lessons. And one of the things that we found to be useful is really respecting local expertise. If you go to a market, you come with a know-it-all approach, you come with a copy and paste kind of strategic approach, you'll find that it will just come down crashing and it's not going to work. So we've learned that in order for us to be viable, to be sustainable in the medium to long term, we've got to respect local talent. So when you enter markets, beforehand, before opening a store, we recruit local talent, take them to our head office, train them in terms of our culture, our values, our philosophy, and our operating model. On day one, when we open a store in a new market, 95% of the talent that we will use to run the business will be from those countries, from the top management level up to the lower levels as well. We do not believe in sending experts to teach people how to run, businesses in their home markets. I think the people that come from those markets know much better than anyone else how best to do business in a respectful way, sustainable way, and inclusive way in those markets. And we've also learned that from a supply chain point of view, we've got to be deliberate and proactive in looking for local suppliers. We have a supplier development fund in South Africa that we set up, and we use that to support local suppliers who do not necessarily have the capabilities and the resources to meet our standards. We help them to be able to raise the level of their game, meet our quality standards, be able to provide us with products at the right price points and at the right quantities on a sustained basis. Some of those suppliers, we've managed to also help them access the global supply chain of Walmart, because we are 100% owned by Walmart. So it's not just them partnering us with our stores in Africa, but also they have the opportunity to break into the global supply chain of a big retailer like Walmart. So there have been lots of lessons, and we continue to learn. As we roll out e-commerce now, there are things that we've tried that have not succeeded, and we learn every day, and we're open. We're students of life, perpetual students of life, and we have to gear our mindsets like that.
Thank you very much. The same question to you all.
I think
What were
overall
the
we
key challenges?
100% agree with you on the philosophy of adopting this constant learning culture and learning attitude, and sharing the philosophy with your employees. I think the one thing I would like to add on our side, being from the DRC, which has known a very turbulent political history and sort of difficult times, I think the one thing that's stuck in our family is never waste a good crisis. Right? So because we've lived through so many crises, it's an odd thing to say, but that's where we're from. We're from a place that has known a lot of crises. Every crisis that's come has put a lot of pressure and tension on our business. Probably had heavy financial losses, but sort of by keeping your feet and your hands on the steering wheel and your eyes focused, we've gone right back into whatever business we were doing and rebuilding. The parameters always changed after a crisis, so it created new opportunities, and there was a gap to be filled. And I think every time we've seen sort of this growth that jumps a little bit exponentially for a couple of years, it's usually post-crisis. So I'll give you a couple of examples. In 1973, there was the Zairinization, so all of our businesses were nationalized by President Mobutu. So my father found himself as an employee in his own business because he transferred his shares to a Congolese counterpart. At that time, a lot of other businessmen had left the DRC or the Zaire or the Belgian Congo at the time, right? Zaire at the time. But just accepting to be an employee in his own business allowed his business to grow tremendously. And when the time came back to give back the shares, the counterpart that owned the company handed back those shares to our family. So you have to sort of take what comes in your stride, and continue. In 1991, we had the war in DRC, and we saw about 80% of our family's wealth was disappeared with looting and pillage. The 20% that was left just got reinvested. And from what my father's telling me is that from 92 to 93, we recovered pretty much everything that we lost within 18 months. So, and these kind of stories sort of keep going on, and that's the environment we come from. So it's never been smooth sailing. There's been colonization, decolonization, nationalization, looting, riots, finishing off. You just pick up and get going. Don't waste too much time.
So for sure, when you hear people saying, "Oh, this crisis in this country," and you are laughing at them because all your way going, you lived in this crisis, and you are continuing, and you are in a.
So look at the hyperinflation that we knew. Like we had Zimbabwean-style hyperinflation in DRC in 91 to 93, where let's say we went to 5 million Zaires was the currency at the time to $1. And we probably had gone from 200 Zaires to 5 million. By 2001, every single bank in DRC was crippled. They were down to about 5% of what their original size was 10 years ago, because inflation eroded their entire balance sheet. That just created an opportunity to open a new bank with fresh capital. And so it's just, just try to move forward with it. It's not a nice thing to do, but it's the way it is.
I think it's a nice story to write, how to navigate through crisis, because
it's tough.
Exactly.
It's tough. It's tough.
Thank you very much. Madame Zneiber, donc justement dans cette même ordre d'idée,
So, Madame Zneiber, so I understand that things have not always been easy for you. So, which were the main challenges that you had to face? For example, there was the moment where you had to step out of distribution for Coca-Cola, and I believe that there were other challenges such as this one through your journey. So talking about Coca-Cola, actually we did not step out of distribution. We will actually start distributing all of the Coca-Cola product, but we're not at that point. Now, before we answer, I would like to say something. I am amazed by the capacity and the resilience of my neighbor, because it is very encouraging. Because in order to be resilient, you need to have good faith. So when you look at both of these elements, we are on the right track, or at least that's what I believe in. Now, talking about the group, I think history is repeating itself in a fairly intense way for all of the people that are committed to entrepreneurship. I, for example, remember very clearly my husband struggling back in the days when there was the soil, the nationalization of land, and this was a time that was really rough. And he was very cautious, and he had the opportunity to diversify. And as part of this diversification, there were challenges to face, especially when you want to keep a governance that is ethical. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices, and we have made sacrifices.
And sometimes we make decisions that I believe were great, and then end up in an unexpected fashion. When we had this experience of Marie Blizzard in France, we lost a lot of money, a lot of time, and we faced unjustified consequences, unfair consequences even, and we are still trying to get redress, and we hope that the justice system will compensate us, because when you have your legal documents that are issued by the lawyer and then they disappear, it's worrisome. But apart from that, I believe the main challenge that we need to rise up to for us that have an agricultural backbone, it's climate change. Climate change has been affecting us adversely for the past half decade with huge difficulties since last year, and things will not be any better this time around. So I believe that governing means anticipating. Of course, you have to be in a position to react. This is what you do when you weren't proactive. But when you're facing the lack of anticipation in some sectors, well, it can be challenging. So that's why I enjoyed the intervention of the Prime Minister of Côte d'Ivoire, Mr. Patrick Hachi, because he laid an emphasis on infrastructures. He mentioned everything that needs to be put into place to incentivize the private sector to come in and invest and produce. Africa is home to treasures, but these treasures have to be made available to all in the most equitable, ethical share. So the land that is cultivated today, we're not supposed to increase production. We need to increase productivity, the yield of each parcel that is already producing. It's not by expanding the land that we're going to amount to anything. I believe that West and East Africa are fortunate enough to have a lot of biodiversity that is still in place, which is not the case where we come from. And we won't have to correct that, we'll just have to maintain it. And for us, that's how we look at each other. We are future champions. We had made a first attempt, I think 5 years ago, if memory serves, to distribute our products. This is what we had in mind, but this was not possible due to the existence of some lobbies that are in place that are hard to circumvent. So we have a different approach this time round, and we hope that things are going to materialize very soon. You did mention the Prime Minister's speech yesterday, and you evoked this importance of infrastructures. I was about to close on 2 points, and this gives me a chance to start the last round of questions with you. These 2 points are the following: how can the state play a role in the development of champions? First point. Second point, I'm going to phrase it right away to make sure we can address both at once. How can we cooperate between African champions to nurture more champions? You talked about distribution. You are the producer of several goods. Mr. Kusini is a large distributor in Africa, in South Africa. So this type of cooperation could bring about more champions. How do you see that going forward? I see that through harmonization of certifications and so on. I see that through an increased reliability of transportation, road transportation at that, with an increase and expansion of the road network, and also a dedicated aerial fleet solely dedicated to transportation of goods, cargo aircrafts. So an airline that would focus solely on cargo aircrafts as part of the AFCFTA, that would be something amazing to allow us to import and export amongst ourselves, because it goes without saying that we cannot produce everything everywhere, and that means that automatically we will have to trade and to offset amongst one another what we can't produce. So that's the first point. What was the second one? How can the state support the development of champions? You talked about infrastructures. If we are to debate Africa as a whole, including Western and Eastern countries, we need all of the states to harmonize the conditions. And it has to be the case individually, first of all, making sure everything is clear, certifications are in place, labels are in order, the organic labels are well governed, to make sure we can resort to products amongst ourselves, resorting to high quality products for imports and exports, and that is totally achievable and possible. Thank you very much. Now over to you, Mr. Roji, feel free to speak in English or in French. It's really up to you. I believe that the most important thing when you speak of DRC is that the government has to focus on creating a middle class. The middle class will drive consumption and demand, and the supply will come to meet that demand. But when we talk about our country specifically, if there was a wish to express, it would be to focus on building core infrastructure, roads, rail, electricity. If our country is able to overcome these hurdles, the rest will follow from the part of the private sector. Education will be developed, healthcare will be developed, because you have someone that is middle class now, they need to educate their children. A professor will maybe start a school with 3 table benches, and then 30 years later, it's going to be an entire university campus on that same site. So we have to remain on basic things, focus on basic things, and be determined when it comes to building that core infrastructure. This is my first time in Ivory Coast, and I'm happy to see that you have infrastructures being built and infrastructures being set up here. Unfortunately, we are on a continent, but in spite of that fact, I believe that the gap is too big between neighboring countries, and you have 54 countries. So we have huge gaps for such a continent. And my wish is for this gap to be narrowed and for us to make steps forward. So there's the bridge on the Congo Bridge that is being built. So that is one of the many opportunities. Look at the scope of DRC. Arable land, the opportunity for agricultures to grow crops and feed the 100 million of people that need food quotidianly. So this is the support from the state that is paramount. And I believe rationalization of fiscality is important, because we are in a logic whereby this is something that we inherited from the colonizers. We need to create an identity that fits our needs, and this reflection is paramount in the country where we find ourselves. We have a lot of positive signs, but we need to remain on the right track and have our eyes set on the prize.
What's the role of the state in helping the champions, helping companies to become champions or the champions to grow? And how do you think we can cooperate between African champions to create this emulation?
Yeah, I think the state has a paramount and a very important role to play. If you look at all the countries that are developed, whether it's Europe or North America or Asia, I mean, we were speaking about South Korea earlier on. It was largely state-led development. You look at the rise of Japan, it was the intervention of the Marshall Plan. And so is the rise of the European countries after the Second World War. They benefited a lot from North American support through the Marshall Plan. So we need a Marshall Plan kind of intervention across Africa for our governments to be very intentional and proactive in helping the private sector to be able to access markets. It's not about governments running private sector companies, but it's about governments using their power and diplomatic capabilities to open doors for African private sector players to access markets. I was recently part of an event in South Africa with the Prime Minister of Singapore visiting. He had a huge delegation of CEOs, and all he was doing was just laying the path for them and opening the path for them to be able to access opportunities, which on their own they cannot do that. Our African leaders have to do that. I don't think we do that intentionally. But in simple terms, I want to say at a national level, governments should set a target of national and African champions they want to create, maybe top 50 in the next 5 years, 100 in the next 10 years, and then measure those targets. At an African Union level, the African Union has got to have a target of how many top African companies do they want to see emerge as global world beaters. just like your Coca-Colas of this world, your Samsungs that we talk about, your Apples, your Alibabas that you see, your Flipkart you see from India, in Mahindras and all that. You look at in the global commercial scheme of things, Africa is conspicuously absent. You can read the Financial Times. There'll be nothing about an African company doing anything. The Wall Street Journal. But it's not just going to happen out of the blue. Champions don't fall from the sky. They're products of industrial policies carefully crafted by smart governments that also understand the need to partner with the private sector. And the problem we have here, we don't have that mutually reinforcing relationship between government and the private sector around Africa. If there are relationships, they tend to be corrupt at certain times, and they're not really driven by the national economic interest. We need to reset relationships between the private sector and the public sector in Africa to be based on driving the national economic interest or the continental economic interest at an African level, not to be based on corruption to access tenders here and there. And again, it's not just African governments that are corrupt. There's corruption everywhere, and some of the corruption is perpetuated by, companies from the first world, rather than African companies. So we need to have a frank and open conversation about ethics, governance, rule of law, and making sure that there is a level playing field in our commercial environment.
Thank you very much for this point.
Want to jump on that? Just want to jump on that one point, that mutually beneficial relationship between the private sector and the governments is so critical, because until we don't achieve that, we stay as commodity exporters. I mean, it's surprising today that in 2023, look at this beautiful country, Ivory Coast, and the amount of cacao that it's producing, yet I still buy Swiss chocolate. Why? There's no need. Absolutely. You go to the supermarket, you look at these, you want to buy lint, you want to buy this. Well, I don't need that. The cocoa, the rest is milk and sugar, but the cocoa is coming from here. Look at the price differential when you buy a chocolate in Switzerland. What you're paying per kilogram of product is 50 times more than the cocoa value that was exported out of Ivory Coast. We don't need to talk about semiconductors. Let's just talk about chocolate. Simple.
Totally agree. So, unfortunately, we have not a lot of time, and we want to open the floor to questions for this interesting discussion. So many people in the room can jump in. I see in front of me Mia Lahlou-Filali, which is a great champion in pharmaceutical. Do you have perhaps something to share or a question? A mic, please. And other question if there is.
I will turn to French. It will be easier for me. Hi, thank you to give me the floor. Je suis venue à cette...
I came to this session because I wanted to be inspired. We are a small actor. When I hear the figures that you mentioned, well, I am at the head of a group that I co-chair with my sister. I co-manage a pharmaceutical group, an industrial one, and we have 150 million euros in turnover annually, globally. And I heard a lot of things that I can relate to. I took a lot of notes that I sent to my sister because it's there to inspire us. But for us, the key to our journey has been a vision, a strong vision. My father's vision, who's the founder. We are the second generation in management. This strong vision, which is pharmaceutical independence and health sovereignty of the Kingdom of Morocco and the continent of Africa. So we are fully integrated. We have our own R&D. We are the only 100% Moroccan actor with, our shareholding is family led, and 100% of our medicine comes from Morocco, developed in Morocco. So it's a pride of ours. We export to 45 countries, many of them in Africa. In Africa, we are the 6th actor out of 1,200. So these are official figures that you can double check. So we have a vision. The marathon that you talked about, respecting local cultures that you evoked. We started working at the national level a decade ago when I came back to Morocco, and my father told the team, there were 2 of them, they said, during 5 years, I don't want you to sell anything. I just want you to understand Africa. It's not a bag. Each country has its own peculiarities, and I want you to understand the peculiarity of each African country. So from that point on, we started working, and today you have this beautiful growth that we've been experiencing globally. Another thing that we share is family DNA, respecting the human being, which was mentioned by Madame Zneba, which is at the heart of our success. So the great question that I have, and that's the reason for my presence, how do we move from a family business where you have the human at the heart of it that is growing? If my father succeeded, that's because people have trusted him for 4 decades. Today, my sister and myself, we are taking over the torch. She's been at the head for 20 years. I've been back since 11 years. That's because we have people trusting us, backing us, and adhering to the values and sharing our vision, our ambition, and our mission, because it's access to healthcare for all. So we even have a social responsibility that is very strong. So how do we become a champion beyond the small size? Well, it's a sizable company, but today we still get to know on a first name basis our collaborators. We're able to maintain this strong relationship that unites us to them and ties them to us, and means that we're still a family moving onwards together. So how do we make sure we don't lose that spirit as we grow bigger?
That's a real issue of family business. How we move from family business to where the link, the individual links are key to these big corporates champion, where things are growing, things are more bigger. So for sure, less individual contacts. What is the key success factor?
If I may just start, your story is very impressive. I also happen to have a pharmaceutical background. I chair Aspen Pharmacare. We are the biggest specialty and branded pharmaceutical company in the Southern Hemisphere. We operate in 60 countries in the world, export our products across 150 countries. We've got a fleet of 23 manufacturing plants around the world. Only 3 are in Africa, the rest are in the EU. We have some in Latin America and also in Asia. So I think the starting point, you just mentioned it, is the DNA that you have, your core values that you have, and the foundation that your father laid. And I think you can use that to start corporatizing your business, which I'm sure you have got some good ideas in terms of that, putting good corporate governance in place and bringing in independent non-executive directors based on the expertise that they bring and the experiences and the networks that they have in the pharma space, whether it's in Africa, but I'll suggest also get global players in the pharma space that can come in and walk the journey with you. And again, it's looking at how do you grow your business, what are the prospects to grow organically, and what are the prospects to grow inorganically, and then how do you access the requisite capital to be able to deploy in order to drive your growth strategy. I think there are massive opportunities for African companies to play in the pharmaceutical space. One of the things that COVID taught us was that Africa has got very vulnerable and very fragile healthcare systems, and we now need to double down on investing in healthcare security across Africa, and especially being independent in terms of manufacturing our own pharmaceutical products. Only 1% of vaccines used in Africa are manufactured in Africa. So there's a huge opportunity there to increase that scope. About 86% of pharmaceutical products used on the continent are imported from outside. And if companies like yours, like mine, work together, and others, we can really make sure that we become, independent and we regain our health sovereignty, so that when the next pandemic comes, we're not on the last queue to get vaccines or to get PPE, as we were this time around, when European countries and North American countries were hoarding vaccines for their own people.
Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I really do, because I sort of feel a connection between what you explained about your family business and our family business, and this idea of how do you maintain the DNA in a growing organization. You start off where you know the names of every single employee, and you know what they like and what they don't like, and then all of a sudden, 20, 30 years later, you walk into an office and you're struggling to remember the names of your people. So how do you maintain that DNA? I think maybe just to sort of maybe give you some comfort is that, given that you're your father's daughter, right, I suppose you're carrying his DNA to such an extent that your team can see it in you. And so you probably don't have to try too hard. It probably comes naturally to a certain extent. And when this sort of initial seed is created of the organization, it's not just the family's DNA, but the teams that were around you initially inherited and adopted that DNA, and they liked it. And they appreciate that DNA. So they carry it forward to the new joiners, to the new employees, and try to preserve it, to carry on so that instead of 100 people, it becomes 1,000 people, and then maybe 10,000 people that are living by that value system that is so true to your family. So there's that aspect. And maybe another point is, I think sometimes as you've taken the leadership of the organization and the CEO of the organization, at some point, I suppose you become the ultimate protector of the value system of the organization. And I feel like saying that becomes your only job, is protecting the values that are true to your organization. The research and development will be done by somebody who's good at it. The marketing will be done by someone who's excellent. The distribution will be done by someone who's fantastic. Your machines will be fixed by an expert. But your true job is protecting the values that you live by, and then keep that thing. I wonder if that helps, if that things, but I kind of feel that way.
Thank you very much for this insight. Very interesting discussion. Another question? We have the mic here.
Moi, je te dirais que
I'll say that it is just transmitting your DNA, passing on your DNA. If you are liked, if you have the proper communication method, automatically this will spread to your teams, and those teams will train new team members, and they will continue to pass on this DNA. That's my take on it, at least. Thank you very much. Good morning. I have a question to all of the panelists. Please introduce yourself. I'm Robert Genga, businessman from Rwanda. A question to all of the panelists, but in particular to you, Mr. Mustafa. Do you have somewhere where you relax? Because as a businessman, it's challenging. You have difficulties. Sometimes it's hard to find an enabling environment, and the country where you operate is an example of that. Do you have a safe haven, an organization of business leaders that you talk to, for example, to become better? How do you deal with your personal life to maintain this equilibrium? Thank you for the question. For me personally, my safe haven are my 3 children and my wife. That's the situation. I'm fortunate enough to spend at least 10 days every month with my family, and I dedicate the entirety of those 10 days to them, and that's my safe haven. And I'm starting to learn spirituality. I meditate. So this is a branch of my religion, Islam, Sufism, that brings you into meditation, 30 minutes with your eyes closed, and that gives you mental peace, and it relaxes the brain for you to remain healthy. I have a question. How old are your children? Because young children, small problems, big children, big problems. So when they become older, it's less challenging because what matters is the credit card. Well, not entirely. So if you allow me, bouncing back on what he was saying,
Je suis très gâtée en
personally, I have a big family. I have a lot of children, grandchildren. I won't tell you how many because I don't want you to take me for a liar. I have a lot. Let's leave it at that. So it brings a lot of joy, and I believe we need to find also joy in difficulty. And when you have this, triggered in you, once you have learned to self-reflect, to meditate using breathing techniques, breathing is the core of life, what allows you to find yourself when you are in a stressful situation, or even as a preventative measure in the morning and in the evening. Praying while meditating is something that can be very strong, and it can even be life-changing when it comes to relieving pains, worries, and concerns. And you have to understand that after the peak of the valley, there's the slope, and then the peak. There's the ups, there's the downs. You have to accept this exercise, and that's the resiliency that we have to display.
Yeah, I think it's been well said by my colleagues. Really, I cannot add anything much more substantive and better, except to say just getting the work-life harmony, some people call it balance, right? It's really something important. You need to be intentional about it, need to plan about it. And I like what Mustafa does, setting aside those 10 days. It's something very important. I also make sure that I set aside certain times when I have to spend time with my family and my kids and just rewind and take time out of a busy business schedule. So it's something very important, and thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. Another question?
Yes, thank you very much. What an inspiring panel, and thank you very much. Very, very inspiring. My name is Cesar Mwangi. I am the Dean of the Strathmore University Business School. And one of the things we have been researching or engaging with various business people who come to our business school is the concept of loving your employees as human beings, and the effect of that and what it does for your business success. I have a feeling here in this panel, from what I've heard, is you may be able to relate to this concept where you have a deep concern for your employees. And we don't like to talk about love in business, let's be frank. But I think it's a concept which we need to talk a little bit more about, because it perhaps makes all the difference. Could you just expand on this particular idea of really loving your employees and being there for them, and maybe some of the examples that you can give other business people to inspire them, because I think it's something people are afraid to talk about. Thank you.
Yes, the factor of caring, love or caring, whatever you call it, but very important.
I'm so fascinated that you're discussing this topic at a business school.
Which
Strathmore? So I went to business school, and what did I learn in business school was hardcore accounting, KPIs, firing employees, hiring talent, throwing people out, cost killers, and we grew up watching movies of that Gordon Gekko, right? Greed is good, and it's all about capitalism and all that. And you know, we never learned, and no one ever taught us how to manage emotion. But the truth about what I'm starting to understand and learn is that the truth about all of us human beings is that we are emotional human beings. And the E is very key. A human being has the right to be sad, disappointed, has the right to cry, has the right to be optimistic, has the right to be hopeful. And through love, we need to learn how to manage emotion and channel emotion, because once you channel emotion, you channel motivation, and then you conquer and you succeed. You can't, we're not robots. So why did they, I wonder why industrialization ever even tried to make us robots? When you looked at the Hawthorne concept of those industrial lines creating Ford motor cars, it was dehumanizing the human being. It's just wrong. It doesn't make sense. So this concept of love, I keep teaching it because I paid too much money to a business school and I learned nothing.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, you probably went to the wrong one, Mustafa. I think Strathmore is waiting for your application. Yeah. So I fully agree that I think it's very important to put employee first. And as far as our purpose is concerned, as I said earlier on, is to help our customers save money so that they can live better. But at the core of that is the employees that can really help the customers save money and feel respected and treated. So our starting point is to respect our employees. We actually don't call them employees, we call them associates. We think that's a respectful term. We don't have employees, we don't have staff, we've got associates. So they are equal stakeholders in the business, just like we are. So we are very deliberate and very proactive in making sure that we create the right environment for them. We do annual employee surveys to allow them to speak out on things that don't work. And from that feedback, we're able to implement changes that improve our employee value proposition as a company. In the post-COVID era, there's a huge rise in mental illness, and companies have to be aware of that and have to be responsive to that. I think what Strathmore is doing is also the right thing. I also happen to be involved with the business school. I chair KIBS, which is the Gordon Institute of Business Science in South Africa, one of the top-rated business school on the continent by the Financial Times of London. So those are things that we incorporate in the curricula that we have for our courses. And Mustafa, you have to look for the right business school. Maybe KIBS is the right one. So I think it's something that we have to incorporate. It's got to be part of the DNA. We talked about DNA earlier on of how we run our businesses. Because without motivated, respected, well looked after employees, you don't have a business. We're sitting here having this panel. They're busy servicing our customers, and we've got to look after them, and we've got to be the shop stewards or the guardians to make sure that their welfare is taken care of.
Alors moi, je pense que il y a tout d'abord une disposition.
So I think there's first of all a natural predisposition that everyone has to go toward somebody in particular. Now, depending on the culture and education, some things are more present within one person or the other. But I believe that it's important for you to have respect for yourself in order to have respect for others. And as part of this process, we can never hurt anybody, whether they're all the way at the top or all the way at the bottom of the ladder. Because if you respect yourself, then you respect the others. And obviously, you're being loved by your collaborators and your people. And this really is how the DNA of a group is shared. It really is love. It really is the main channel for the link. And I would like to say that I'm more of a tough one, but I can be gentle. Last question.
Thank you. My name is Israel and I'm from Rwanda, leading a software company. I think in the same theme around the employees, I'm curious to hear how you bring along the leaders who work with you. I lead a 130 people company with about 11 reports, and I find a bit difficult or challenging or interesting to think about bringing along these leaders. And you've been leading your companies for quite some time, so how was it in the first year? How has it evolved in the 5 years, 10 years, 20 years afterwards? And maybe how do you keep at it, especially as you look, some of you, to become the champions who make $1 billion and really speaking more of the executive management team that works around you? Thank you so much.
We'll take the 3 questions in a row to answer them together.
Yeah, my name is, I'm going to just piggyback on the same
question. My name is Nasibu Sareva from Tanzania, diaspora from Minnesota. I lead a community development financial institution in Minnesota, trying to invest in Africa. So I'm going to direct my questions to especially the value protectors and the college. Have you guys looked into, I've seen a few companies in the US that are trying to actually give shares to the employees, so now we have employees ownership into the companies. And I think a couple of them are actually 100% owned by the employees. Have you looked into that? And is there a research in any business school that looked into that? And what will value being added into employees who are actually being share owners?
Bonjour, je suis directeur communication de Mazar au Maroc.
Good morning, I'm Director Communication of Mazar in Morocco. So I'm not directly linked to business. By listening to your journeys, it was very interesting, and I was wondering, as champions of the continent, do you have a role to play, or should you have a role to help new champions rise to the surface? And if so, how would you do it?
C+ to go in the journey, how you bring with you other champions to make them come, how you bring with you your staff to make them partners.
Happy to start. I think the first question from Ruben, from Israel from Rwanda. Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's all about setting the tone from the top, Israel, just knowing that everyone understands what the culture is, what the values are, and that there is buy-in by the top team in terms of how we treat employees, how we treat other stakeholders, and how we treat the environment, basic philosophical issues of alignment around those values, because your leadership team is very important to the extent that employees look at what they do, not just what they say, that shapes the culture. So it's important that there is proper alignment between what is said and what is done, and that has to be about the right value system that is shared across the organization, a tangible sense of common purpose, very important, and leadership has a duty to articulate that and to live up to that, not just talk the talk, but also to be seen to be walking the talk. On the issue of share ownership, that's a very important question. In my company, we did give shares to employees, and the issue was to make sure that they also share the same values as the shareholders of the company, and it had a very positive motivating effect because they walk up going to a company where they're not just employees, as I said, we call them associates, but they're also shareholders. They have shareholding in the business. There was wealth creation that was generated. I would argue that it's something that is certainly worth considering so that there is proper shared value. I mean, employees are involved in creating value for shareholders, and if there is a gain that is made, it should be shared. The point that you've made, just the last question again?
Salwa, about how you bring with you small companies to make them.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a very structured way of doing it. We have a supplier development program. We've got people that are full-time employed. We allocate capital to that and resources, where we mentor small and medium enterprises to integrate them into our supply chains. As I mentioned earlier on, a lot of them have shown success, not just in supplying us in Africa. We've assisted some to access the global supply chain of Walmart, because we are part of the Walmart organization globally. So that's certainly something very important. If you are a champion, you've got to create other champions. You can't just be a champion alone. And I think that's what Africa needs, more champions, so that we can catch up with the rest of the other continents.
Alors pour vous répondre, je vais juste prendre.
So everything was really said Really well said. So the point really is to create new champions via the agricultural system. It's all about aggregates. So we need to turn to smaller farmers and add them to our system and help them improve in terms of skill. And it's really as part of this system that we are working in Africa and also in Morocco. So it's all about sharing. Okay, we're talking about the question of shareholding. So there are several ways to see things. You know, there was an example that was given, companies that have become gradually completely owned by shareholders that are employees. I think we can even go to something slightly different. We could share based on merit, for example. So we can contribute to the wealth of the company, and it's all about a common work. And it's something that can happen through benefits and other interesting things that we can provide to our partners, you know, beyond what's been usually done. So it's a way for you to share the profit, right? Yes, that way they only have profit, no risk.
Have any experience, but like you, I'm very interested in learning more about it. And I do feel that eventually, you know, all companies have senior leadership teams, and those senior leadership teams, you know, the 10 or 20% of your associates that are driving the organization with you should probably be quite aligned with you as well. So an ESOP might be the right thing to do. But like you, I'm trying to discover it and see how how to put something like that together. I think, to your point, and it was said earlier, I think really to be able to become a champion is really in essence, your business should be enabling other people to become champions. And when you can enable them to become champions, makes you a champion. So that's the real, the philosophy, I think, of becoming a champion. I was deeply inspired by the founder of Yango, who I met last night at dinner. And when he sort of told me that his business, sort of like an Uber, sort of, you know, is just the drivers, but Yango's business model is that he creates fleet owners. So if you go to Yango, if you don't know the company, it's sort of like an Uber. But let's say, for example, I'm an owner of one car and I go to Yango. Yango will allow me to buy 10 or 15 cars with 10 or 15 drivers. And I will then sort of create my fleet that's under Yango. And he told me something crazy, that in Ivory Coast, one of his fleet owners has now 3,000 cars.
Exactly.
So just imagine how many champions he's created for him to become the champion that he is today. And I think that's sort of something that's really inspiring. And we all need to, I need to replicate that thought process.
We used to say bigger will be the big when the small become big. Exactly. So I think it was a very amazing discussion and nice examples to share, and that's what all the spirit of the Africa CEO Forum and what we are talking about. We need to have role models to see that things can happen in different environments, even in an environment where when I talk to people about DRC, they are scary. Tomorrow, if I tell them, oh, look what is Roji doing in DRC, and he's exclusively in DRC, I think it's inspiring. The same when we see all these examples of your companies, what you are doing. And that's very key to push people to know that things are possible. We need to be resilient, sure. We need also to put the all the things to allow us to become champions. As you said, I think that is the sentence of the conclusion. I will say champions doesn't fall from the sky. Yes, you're right, it doesn't fall from the sky. There is a way to arrive there. I think with that, we can really give a big round of applause to our speakers, which were quite great and inspiring. Thank you very much. And perhaps have a photo of the panel before leaving the room. Thank you so much.
Merci à tous.